I'm here today with Reverend Steve Kanji Ruhl, a Zen Buddhist minister in Western Massachusetts. He is affiliated with the Yale Buddhist Sangha. Kanji was a guest this afternoon in the Life Worth Living class here at Yale University, and so we're here this afternoon to talk about his work, yes, but also about life, or maybe there shouldn't be much of a difference between those two things. About what it is to live a life worth living. Kanji, if I may.
Yes.
It's great to have you here.
Wonderful to be here, Matt.
So I thought we'd just start right here. We're talking through these various traditions as we go through this class, and students are kind of considering these as options, ways of answering this really difficult question that we're all faced with in life. What is it to live a life worth living? Why are you a Zen Buddhist? What drew you to the tradition, to its practices?
That's a great question, and I think the most immediate answer is I recall that when I was first beginning Zen practice, I was going out to Zen Mountain Monastery in the Catskills in upstate New York, and there was a woman who was a monk there named Jimon, and she had been a dancer with a very prestigious modern dance troupe in Manhattan before becoming a Zen Buddhist nun. But she said the very first weekend I was there that she became a Zen Buddhist nun because each night when she puts her head on the pillow, she wants to be able to say, "I have no regrets." And actually, I think I became a Zen Buddhist practitioner for the same reason, so that I can say, not just each night when I put my head on the pillow, but at the end of my life, whenever that may be, that I have no regrets. And up until the time, a little over 20 years ago, when I first began this practice, I was starting to feel more and more adrift and blindly groping for a way to address that sense of being adrift. And I had just come out of the breakup, very, very painful breakup of a relationship with a woman I thought that I would spend my life with. And in the turmoil of the aftermath, I happened to walk in to a Zendo, a center for practicing Zen Buddhism, and immediately sensed that I was home. And there was a sense in the austerity and purity and directness of the practice, and also a sense in the affirmation of the individual's ability to awaken, what we call in Japanese the jiriki, the self-power, that really spoke to me. And although I respect the other Buddhist traditions deeply, it's the Zen tradition that really, really has been able to enhance my life in this way that's allowed me to say that I have no regrets.
That's powerful motivation. What resources do you find in the tradition, the way of life that, as we've read, the text, some of the texts that you recommended? This is a difficult way of life. It's not it requires discipline. What kinds of resources does the tradition offer you? Surely it's more than just setting this really kind of high bar. What helps do you have along the way?
Yeah, it is a difficult practice. One of the texts that the students have been reading is Everyday Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck. And Joko at one point comments that although it is a very difficult practice, it's actually much harder not to practice. So one of the resources I find in working this practice is that the practice itself can provide incentive for continuing. And some of the resources are inner resources. It is a matter of cultivating a certain amount of inner discipline. To sit on the cushion, even when you don't necessarily feel impelled to do that, although over time it feels more and more organic and more natural, less of a struggle. But there are resources within the Sangha community as well. And those resources, that feeling of being able to have communal support, I think is really important. When I'm down here with the Yale Buddhist Sangha, one of the many things I love about doing that is it serves as a resource for me to experience the collective wisdom and compassion of the people in that community. And it's not strictly Buddhist. We also have some Christians, some Jews, occasionally a Muslim or a Hindu student will show up. And what I find when I'm in that setting is we're really able to share each other as a resource, and that's part of that collective experience of awakening that's so valuable.
So as we're looking at each of these traditions, we're thinking together with the students about kind of three different dimensions of the good life, three different dimensions of the life that we're after. Life going well, life led well, life feeling good or feeling as it ought. And each tradition, of course, kind of defines those three dimensions differently. From your understanding within the Zen Buddhist tradition, what does it mean for life to go well? Does it matter if life goes well, if the circumstances of life are good? Do they matter, or am I to learn to transcend them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think it's so much a matter of learning to transcend the circumstances of life as to simply be with them and to be present with them and to accept life as it is, which doesn't mean being complacent or apathetic. There are times when we need to change circumstances in our lives, and it's necessary to take action to do that. But overall, to stop fighting life, to stop insisting that I have to have it my way, to stop insisting that my own egotistical needs determine everything, and to stop insisting that I'm the center of this particular universe, really is very liberating. And so for life to go well, life is just going to do whatever it does. Our interpretation of whether it's going well or not is usually an ego-based interpretation. From an objective point of view, I've had people tell me that I've led a very hard life. I grew up in working class poverty in the rural central Appalachian mountain region of Pennsylvania, very conservative, very violent area. I was physically assaulted and bullied in high school, which was traumatic. An ex-girlfriend who was a very close personal friend of mine at the time committed suicide. My beloved younger sister committed suicide. These have been a series of traumas. And yet I have a feeling of joy in my life, despite the grief, the very real grief, and the hardship and the struggle that also has been involved in this particular lifetime. And so for me to say that my life has gone well is really not so much a relevant question as to say that my life has been doing what life does, and I feel grateful, I feel fulfilled, and I feel joyful within this ongoing process for however much longer it may take.
You say you feel joy. We were talking earlier today. There's a kind of a booming business around happiness these days.
Yes.
But you prefer to talk about joy. What do you think is different between joy and happiness?
Yeah, good question. And also, just to emphasize that when I say my life has been an expression and still is an expression of joy. It's not for a moment to discount the sorrow and the pain that's been there as well. But in terms of joy and happiness, from a Zen Buddhist point of view, happiness is an emotion that's conditioned and based on circumstances. It's provisional, and so it's contingent on whether certain needs are being met. I'll feel happy if I get this. I'll feel happy if this happens. I'll feel unhappy if they don't happen. And so precisely because happiness is a conditioned emotion, dependent on circumstances, it's very ephemeral. And that creates anxiety in people because when we feel that we're happy, we also feel, well, this can't last. Eventually, it's going to go away. And we're caught often in this pattern of attraction and aversion. I'm attracted to things I think will make me happy. I'm averse to things that I think will make me unhappy. So there's that tension of the push and pull. There's the anxiety around the inherent transience of happiness. And it's relatively superficial, too, because it is based on contingencies. It's inherently shallow compared to joy, which is deeper and more abiding and is unconditioned, and precisely because it is unconditioned, can be present anywhere, anytime. And I often mention that when I did a solo retreat at the Nazi concentration camp in Poland of Auschwitz-Birkenau, I remembered reading that even there, in the most horrific, hellish circumstances, people were still able occasionally to experience moments of true joy, not happiness because they were in abject misery, but a happiness that really is not dependent on external circumstances. It might be triggered by something that happens externally, but that's not where it's rooted. That's not where the source is. The source is deep, deep inside, and it's always there. We always have it if we can access it.
Mm. So it sounds like for you, then life feeling good, or the kind of affective dimension of the good life, is the life of joy. Is that right, or is there other language you use to describe that as well?
It would be a life of joy if we define that as encompassing a feeling of contentment within whatever it is that arises in life and whatever life presents.
So better contentment than joy?
It's a joy that I want to emphasize the contentment part only because people are so quick to dichotomize between joy and, say, anguish, or joy and suffering. And joy can actually include anguish and suffering, but it's a way to be contented within both joy and suffering, whatever life is presenting. So that affective component is really one, I think, of equanimity. There's a balancing. When I say that my baseline is equanimity, it means that I can feel tremendous happiness, I can feel tremendous sorrow, but it quickly reverts back to my baseline of equanimity. Mm. And that equanimity has an affective measure of joy. And just one more thing, that joy is so closely related to gratitude. It's being thankful for life no matter what. It's saying yes to life no matter what. Because this is precious and it goes so fast. I can't believe how fast it goes. These decades are just flying by. So to be grateful for life no matter what.
As we've read in this tradition, students have really wrestled with, as we think about kind of the affective dimension of the good life as described in various Buddhist texts, they've struggled with this concept of non-attachment. It's easy for someone who comes to this tradition from the outside to see that and think, oh, is this tradition advocating some sort of aloofness?
Mm.
But that doesn't sound like what you're describing, and it
Mhm.
certainly doesn't describe a tradition that, at the same time, we also say compassion seems to be one of its signature practices.
Mhm.
So can you describe non-attachment and how that works together and exists alongside an emphasis on compassion? And what is non-attachment?
It's a great question. It comes up so frequently. In Zen Buddhism, and I would say generally in Buddhist practice, a Buddhist life is an engaged life. It's a deeply engaged life. So it's not aloof. And there's a practice of opening up the heart, and that's where the compassion naturally arises from. In the moment of no separation, that moment of experience of oneness, that lack of a dualism between self and other naturally creates a heart connection. And that heart connection is the connection of compassion. And it's not aloof at all. It's deeply felt. But it's not clinging and grasping. It's not codependent. It's not needy. It's not desperate. It's a heart connection that doesn't involve holding on so tightly that it destroys true intimacy. The heart connection is a strong connection that can endure even if there's geographical distance, even if there's temporal distance. So non-attachment simply points to a deep, engaged connection that isn't clinging and grasping. People do often get confused about that. They often get confused too about the word detachment. Detachment and non-attachment are different. Detachment is simply being objective or disinterested in a situation, being neutral. Non-attachment has more to do with being fully present, but again, not clinging and grasping.
So you can be both non-attached and connected.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that actually one is even more connected because they are, or better, more healthily connected because they are not attached?
Well, I would say so. I would say so. I think it's a more healthy form of connection because that emotional overlay of neediness and anxiety isn't present. There's a clarity to it. And it also allows for more freedom and more mobility.
So the third dimension that we talk about is life led well. The kind of the proper use of our agency. From your point of view and from your experience and from your practice, what does it mean for life to be led well? Is this again, we read in the stories of the life of the Buddha that there was a time of ascetic practice where he thought that maybe the life led well was a life of ascetic exertion. And it seems that there's a middle way. It's not indulgence, it's not asceticism. So maybe it's not exertion in that sense, but there is a discipline to it, isn't there? So what is life led well in this tradition?
Yeah. Part of what's entailed in a life led well, I think, is actually allowing life to unfold freely and being able to actually be led by life, to not resist so much and not fight life so much. But at the same time, there's a necessity for agency, and the allowing life to simply unfold naturally is what happens through the experience of no separation, of oneness. In the realm of relative phenomena that we act in, I think it's necessary to have agency and also to have a moral agency, and that's where the precepts are so invaluable. the ethical precepts of non-killing, non-stealing, not misusing sexuality, not lying, not clouding the mind through the use of intoxicants, not elevating the self and blaming others, not clinging to others' errors and faults, not being stingy, not being angry, and honoring self and others, the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Those are guidelines that I think help to inform our necessity to act in the world and to help create a life that's worth living. So to lead a life worth living, I think, entails both surrender. There's an element of surrender to life and to flow, surrendering and flowing with it, not resisting, but also discerning when it is necessary to act and to do that, again, with moral responsibility.
So lots of the way, especially that you talk about this tradition, it's a matter of practice, and this is a way that we you describe this as very much part of just everyday life. Students that are taking this class are often, we're talking about college students. The question of career and what should I do in my life, it came up today in our question and answer session with students. Is this a way of life that's compatible with any job, any career path? Is this, I have to make my career decision based on some other set of principles, and then this gives me a kind of set of techniques and a way of living life well, regardless what I choose, or might it inform what I choose to do with my life?
Yeah, I think it really can inform what you choose to do with your life. It gives you a set of practices that help to instill emotional balance, mental clarity, rigor and discipline, and those are qualities that can really be used to enhance any career that a person might choose. And I think often there's a notion that there's something elitist about Buddhist practice. There's a stereotype about estranging yourself from the world and hiding from the world, which comes out of the monastic tradition, even though monasticism is actually very engaged, much more so than people realize. But I think that these practices really not only can enhance a person's ability to flourish in any job setting, but also can help to enhance the job setting itself, because the presence of somebody who knows how to be alert and attentive, knows how to be a deep listener, knows how to respond to the inevitable crises that arise in any workplace, because there are always conflicts between people, knows how to respond to those with a certain level of equanimity and compassion, is going to be somebody who can really help to make that a better workplace. And people tend to respond to that. People tend to sense when that kind of energy is in the room. In the Zen tradition, there's a series of pictures called the 10 ox herding pictures. They come from China. They were imported into Japan. And they depict graphically a progression of seeking and waking up. The symbols used are somebody looking for an ox that has wandered. But in any case, the very last picture in the 10 ox herding series depicts the person who is awakened coming down from the mountain and walking into the marketplace. And nobody realizes that that person is an awakened Zen practitioner. In the old terminology, we would have said an enlightened Zen master, but I don't like that terminology. But a person who has awakened to his or her life. Nobody realizes that that's who that person is, but the simple presence of that person in the bustling marketplace makes the flowers bloom. So I think that for somebody to do this practice, it's very practical. It's a practice that's practical. And it has benefits both for the practitioner and for the people that person's working with. It helps to make the flowers bloom in the marketplace.
Hmm. Hmm. There's a so then this isn't a tradition that is sort of you can read sometimes in these texts things that sound like, oh, you have to cease from striving and cease from. Are you describing what you're describing is it a non-attached way of nevertheless goal seeking or seeking to do good work, do meaningful work? Is that?
I think, yeah, this is an interestingly complicated question because, again, there are various Buddhisms, and you do find Buddhism, specifically in the Theravada tradition, that emphasize ceasing from striving. And traditionally, that has to do also with being free from the wheel of rebirths and so on. In my tradition of Zen Buddhism, that's not really emphasized so much, but what we do emphasize is that in the actual practice itself, there's nothing to gain, there's nothing to achieve because we already have it. And nevertheless, it's important to strive in the practice. It's important to be persistent. It's important to give it your best effort and to really, really be dedicated. So there's that striving, but it's a striving that's not attached to the outcome of a particular goal. It's not attached to any particularly rigid ideas of what things should be that would result in foreclosing other possibilities, because it's important to be nimble. It's important to be responsive. So the striving that in a practical sense we would be called to in an academic setting like Yale, or after graduation in a probably high-powered workplace, is a striving that would be for the purpose of achieving what needs to be done, but without the sense of self-aggrandizement and without the sense of attachment to an ultimate goal. It's important to keep a goal in sight, but not to be so attached to it that it's really becoming problematic.
I find it really interesting as a Christian myself that a couple times today in conversation with students, you referred to Jesus, and you commented several times, and how do you as a Buddhist think about Jesus?
I love that you asked that. Well, you know, I didn't come from a family that went to church regularly, but I did go to Sunday school. I did know the Bible stories at a very early age, and there's something residual there that is very, very compelling for me. But it's also, you know, when I was in divinity school at Harvard, I did a lot of work in Christian New Testament and also in some of the non-Orthodox Christian traditions. And also as an undergraduate, when I was doing honors work in religious studies at Penn State, which my undergraduate degree is in. And I love reading the Gospels. And for me as a Buddhist practitioner, Jesus does seem like a great bodhisattva, a bodhisattva being somebody who dedicates himself or herself to relieving the suffering of all beings. Of course, he's, as presented in the biblical text, he's a complicated figure, and I really cherish that. So it's impossible to be reductionistic and simplify it, but I'm also so moved by the human drama in a way that I'm not when I read Buddhist sutras. Now, in our Zen tradition, we don't focus on the sutras that much because traditionally it's a transmission outside the scriptures. But I'm fairly conversant with them, and when I read them, I respect them. I'm interested in what the Buddha reputedly taught. but I'm not engaged at the heart level in the way that I am when I'm reading about Jesus. And it usually moves me to tears because the human drama is something I think we all can relate to. And whether or not you accept the divinity of Jesus or believe that he was God made flesh, there's something so immediately familiar in the love and the suffering of this being that for me can't help but touch a deeply responsive chord. And so there's the bodhisattva model of caring for those who are suffering, those who are marginalized, those who are ignored in conventional society. And there's also this tragedy of somebody who is teaching, somebody who's betrayed, somebody who's alone, somebody who is trying to understand his mission on earth, has deep questions, also deep certainties, and goes forward to the destiny that he knows is awaiting him. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary. Obviously, it goes without saying. It's moved so many people for so long, and there's a good reason for that. Whether you're Buddhist or Christian or Muslim, or somebody who's just a humanist impressed by the humanist aspect of Jesus as a teacher.
Mm. Thanks so much for all that you've shared with us today. I have just one last question for you, which is, you have students going through this class. If you were to offer one thing, or if you could make sure that a student who had this encounter with Buddhism in this class, whether at Yale or at another university where they're doing this course, what's the one thing you would want them to take with them from their, albeit too brief, encounter with this tradition? A question or a thought that you would want them to carry with them? What would that be?
I would just say, take what you have learned about Buddhism in this class and test it in your own life. Test it in your own life. Don't take anything for granted. Question it all, question it deeply, and test it. Test it in your own life and see if it works. And if it does work, you might be interested in continuing, and I would invite you to explore that. And there are various ways to do that. If it doesn't seem to work for you when you test it in your own life, then let it go. Find something else. The important thing is to find a life worth living. And I know for myself, my Zen practice helps me to do that, but it may not be for everybody. So test it in your own life.
Kanji, thank you so much for all that you've shared with us. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Matt.